Welcome back to Inside City Hall. As we reported earlier, legendary political and media consultant David Garth died today, an influential power broker in the city for decades. Even if you never heard Garth's name, your life was influenced by the ads or the advice he gave to candidates and elected officials. Joining us now to talk more about Garth's legacy is longtime strategist and former press secretary for the late Ed Koch, George Arzt, and Alana Newhouse, formerly an aide to David Garth and currently editor of Tablet magazine. Thanks so much for being here to remember. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
George, I want to ask you first, help me understand, why was David Garth so important?
All the people he represented were underdogs. And don't forget, John Lindsay was going up against the machine. In his re-election, he had the snowstorm and people didn't expect him to win. He lost the Republican line. It was a difficult election. Ed Koch was in a 7-person race.
Rudy against an incumbent?
No incumbent. A-Beam, yes. A-Beam was there, but Bella was the favorite. Mm-hmm. Bella and Cuomo were the favorites. For Rudy, he had lost previously, not with David, but he had lost and then won with David, and Mike Bloomberg. All of them were difficult races against the Democratic.
And did he have a particular style that he used, that he brought to political advertising that hadn't been there before?
Well, roughly his style was known as cinema verite. That's what he believed in part because he really believed in the natural qualities of a candidate. To him, David, a lot of people criticize David for being the first mercenary in politics, but what he was a mercenary for were politicians who he believed could govern. So he actually represented the most diverse set of candidates. I really would challenge anyone today.
So Garth was himself invested in the candidate, not just from a monetary point of view, but he actually believed the candidate. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely.
He believed in his candidates. He had a lot of integrity. When we were shooting commercials, he would say, "You better be right on your facts," and most times nowadays, just put it on air. But he never wanted to be called a deception or anything like that.
Let's take a look at an ad from your former boss.
Sure.
This is from 1977. Let's take a look at Ed Koch running for mayor.
Most political campaigns lack humor, but it's obvious this one's going to be different. 4 years ago, A-Beam told us he knew the buck. And 2 years later, we didn't have any bucks. Then he told us he made the tough decisions. He must have forgotten Felix Rohatyn, Steve Berger, Governor Carey, and Big Mac. Now Mayor Beam is asking for 4 more years to finish the job. Finish the job? Hasn't he done enough?
One of the things that Garth did, not only was that ad, but he also told Ed Koch that he needed to lose 10 pounds, which made the papers, and that he had to shed the suits, right? The three-piece suits?
He had to go to Barney's and get new suits. Ed was a very thrifty person and didn't like to go for the big bucks, but he learned there. And
you know what David told me about asking Ed to lose weight? He told me that it had a secondary consequence, which was he wanted Ed to know that he had to listen to someone else.
Oh, that's interesting.
And so he told Ed, "You're going to have to." Who's the
boss?
Right. He told Ed, "For this campaign, you're going to have to listen to me. I'm your advisor for a reason." And it's that kind of sense of human psychology and how it works in politics that was he was a genius.
Well, he was gruff too. You worked with him both in the political arena and also when you were a reporter.
Yes, well, the first 10 words of whatever he wanted from you were always expletives. And sometimes he would get on the phone and just say, before...
Don't actually say it.
Before he mentioned my last name, always my last name, he would go through, and I said, "Yes, David." But he was the loyalest person I've ever known. I mean, this when Koch had his stroke in 1987, I didn't know where to turn, and David and Ed had their battles, and they weren't talking, and I said, oh, I got to end this. And so David calls me and said, listen, kid, I'm in your corner. And every day I called him for the week or so that Ed was out, and we would go over what we were doing and what we had to do. Then, hesitantly, I went to Ed and I said, Ed, David was helping me, and a light shone on his face, and Ed said to me, I knew he'd be there.
Let's go to the Rudy baseball ad. This is from 1993. Let's play that one.
When I was 2 years old, my father put a Yankee uniform on me and sent me downstairs to play with the kids. And the first thing they did was throw me in the mud. So here I was in the middle of Brooklyn. I was the only kid on my block that rooted for the Yankees. All my uncles were Dodger fans. All my friends were Dodger fans. And we would travel all the way to the Bronx to watch the Yankee games because my father made me into the only Yankee fan in Brooklyn. I was it. I mean, I couldn't find, for years, I couldn't find another kid from Brooklyn who was a Yankee fan.
Alana, why was this ad so influential?
Well, it's the exact clip that you chose, which was that actually was, Giuliani did not know that the camera was still rolling at that point. And that was an old trick of David's, which was he would leave the camera on after the candidate thought it was off, and you'd get your most natural statements from them, and you'd actually get them as human beings. And that's what David wanted voters to see, the candidate as he or she actually was.
He wore down the people on camera, kept on asking questions until he got the Yankee quote. A Yankee in Brooklyn is the guy you want.
That's interesting. One final one before, unfortunately, we have to go. Let's play a little snippet of a 1969 ad. George, quickly set this up. This is John Lindsay speaking directly to the camera. What had happened that winter?
The huge snowstorm, that was a major debacle for John Lindsay, a strike at the beginning of his tenure, and he manages, without saying I'm sorry, he manages to say I'm sorry.
Let's take a look.
I guessed wrong on the weather before the city's biggest snowfall last winter, and that was a mistake. But I put 6,000 more cops on the streets, and that was no mistake. The school strike went on too long, and we all made some mistakes. But I brought 225,000 new jobs to this town, and that was no mistake. And I fought for 3 years to put a 4th police platoon on the streets, and that was no mistake.
You know, it looks dated to a lot of people seeing it now, but that was extremely powerful, what is that, 45 years ago.
I still find it powerful. And the other thing to realize is, you know, David worked on the elections of the first female governor in this country, female governor in her own right, the first black mayor of LA. I mean, this was a very progressive-minded person who actually understood, like I said, the psychology not only of candidates but of voters. And
Never trusted the machine.
Never.
And Ned did like machine candidates. He liked the people who were going to do well in governing and were honest.
That's right.
Can you say that he elected people who wouldn't have been elected?
No doubt about it. All of them were underdogs, or most of them were underdogs. Hugh Carey was an underdog too, Samuels. Ella Grasso was an underdog. Brendan Byrne. All these people. John Anderson. How could he have ever thought about running for president? He took that campaign.
How did he work? What did he do to the candidate, aside from apparently break them down and know that they should be submissive and know who's the boss? What was his modus operandi?
I mean, it was an incredibly customized situation. David worked with candidates and he worked with their personalities and their psychology the way that he knew they would need to work. So somebody like Koch, he would work at differently than, let's say, someone like Asila Calderon in Puerto Rico, or someone like Menachem Begin in Israel. And he also did a lot of international campaigns, which is another fascinating part of him. So he was incredibly supple and really fluid, and actually for somebody so gruff, was so sophisticated psychologically. It's something that I think a lot of people don't get about him.
Okay, George, final thoughts?
He could go from being the most charming man in the world to being the cigar chomping real thug, to a candidate. Like, David, would you stop it already? But there was no one like him. It was just, Hollywood would have to invent someone. In fact, it did. They put him in, he was the candidate, he was the model for
the candidate.
For the guru to Robert Redford in the candidate.
Oh. Well, both of you, thanks so much for helping me remember. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Time now for a break. Straight ahead, the four members of our Consultants Corner will discuss the mayor's relationship with the NYPD, and then later, we've always known the charms of Queens, but now the rest of the world is apparently catching on. We'll talk it over with Queens Borough President Melinda Katz and a leading professor. Don't go away.